Archie's Pal Jughead Comics 200. It starts out as just a mundane Archie story without magic in it. Archie says he has an idea of what to do after school, and Veronica makes a snarky guess about what he plans to do, saying that it starts with chalk and ends with omp. And somehow Jughead doesn't know, based on that very obvious dialogue, that she knew he wanted to go to Pop-Tates, and says something stupid instead. Usually, in a normal Archie story, there isn't something contrived on the first page. All this started because of Veronica, who goes to Pop-Tates all the time in Archie and never complains about it. So it's not in character for her to be tired of going there to the point of snarking about this. And since they go to Pop-Tates so often, anybody would assume Archie's idea was that they would do something other than that. Because you don't say, I have an idea, if you're gonna do something you usually do. Out of nowhere, Jughead says that there's something he always wanted to try, teaching his grandma how to ride a motorcycle, even though it's obvious most grandmas wouldn't agree to that. Because he wants to make money off endorsements. I was hoping he was joking, but because he looks unhappy after his friends stare at him, it's clear that he wasn't just joking about this. This only happened for a joke where his friends look at him shocked. And again, it's completely forced, so it's not a good start. If you want to have a joke about a character being impossibly stupid, why not use Moose instead? If he was being sarcastic here, that would have been more in character than this. I've read a lot of Archie from the 40s to the 90s stories, and I don't remember the jokes at characters' expenses being as forced as this most of the time. I just remember Archie being clumsy and stupid in usually believable ways. But this makes it look like either the Archie stories aren't as good anymore in general, or this specific writer isn't doing well. Speaking of impossibly stupid, then he says he'll take the long way home just to prove he can change up his routine. Since when does he care so much about what they think of him that he'll put himself through that to prove them wrong about him being simple and predictable, which he's always taken pride in, along with being lazy. The problem is that this is the entire reason he finds this diner, because a lazy person did something nobody would do for an out-of-character reason. The story could have easily started with him in front of the diner, no problem. It could have been explained that he had to take a detour to here because a road was closed for construction. It shouldn't be too hard to believably explain why Jughead would find and go to a diner. He takes out food as his personality. So it would have been fine to simply have him go here because it's a new restaurant, and that'd be less wasted comic space. The story finally gets intriguing when he says he didn't know they had a diner on that hill, or even a hill at all. If there's a new hill, it's already too obvious that magic is involved. So you'd think the head witch would have undone it and lectured the person for making scientists come here and investigate. Everyone would be talking about this. I see no reason for there to be a new hill here, so it just makes things less believable, even if it does make the revelation about what's in here come less out of nowhere. Jughead wishes Veronica could see him doing something new. Again, since when would he really care about her disapproval of him in any way instead of not caring or relishing in it? If he cared about what people thought of him, he would eat less and try to ask girls out. Jughead finds getting up the hill tiring and says he's the only sucker willing to scale a hill for food. If it's exhausting for customers to go all the way up to this diner, it makes even less sense that a hill was conjured up, because that equals less customers. I guess the person wants to make some money but would be overwhelmed by too many customers at once. He gets startled by a woman named Darlene wanting to take his order because she wasn't around before, and she bets she has a special that's hard to resist. She says it'd be too expensive for him, and when he says he'll pay any amount, she stupidly says it's not for sale for money. Why would she turn down money? In all cases, for something. Couldn't she demand to get something along with money? Somehow Jughead assumes that this normal-looking woman wants his soul, even though I thought Archie characters didn't believe in supernatural people. It's obvious that in this situation you would have assumed that she was propositioning him instead. He's a teenager, not an innocent little kid who's never heard of love just because he isn't interested in dating. If he was this quick to make this assumption, how did he not figure out Sabrina? There's no way she'd insist on getting people's most prized earthly possessions instead. If the logic for not caring about money is that she can zap up money that won't be detected as counterfeits, the same logic would apply to this. There's no practical reason for trying to get mortals' prized possessions this way if you can zap up anything. But it can easily be explained as her just being a sadistic person. She wants to make immortals suffer the most she can, and money can be gotten back with hard work or something. But a prized possession would be irreplaceable and ruin their life. And somehow, a guy who didn't know Sabrina was a witch never questions how she plans on taking his metabolism away. Maybe he thinks she's delusional, and so there's no harm in agreeing to get some free food. But he wouldn't think that if he believed in the supernatural to the point where he instantly assumed that she wanted his soul. At that point, it's inarguable that he knowingly entered a contract with a supernatural being to give up something that he'd know better than to give up. He would have always been grateful for his metabolism. So even Jughead wouldn't do this because anyone would know that if he gives up his metabolism, it leads him getting to eat less for the rest of his life. Because either he wouldn't live as long or he'd be put on a diet. And he can get food in other places without giving it up. And even the mere risk of losing it clearly isn't worth it, when he doesn't even know for sure if this diner gives away good-tasting food yet. Surprisingly, we don't actually see the moment where he gave it up. I know how tempting food is to him, and how younger people are even less likely to think ahead. But still, he could have thought to check other restaurants to see if he could eat the same kinds of food there. This is just barely believable as a premise because we know how hard it is for him to resist food, but he can do it actually. I just got done reading a story in Archie issue 473, where he went by multiple restaurants selling food, even if Archie did have to tell him to take off in the first place. The fact remains, if he was incapable of passing up food, he wouldn't have skateboarded away from those places just because he was told to. The problem with this is, instead of a barely believable premise based on character exaggeration, you could have easily kept it simple and had this witch take away his metabolism on sight with no warning, with no other excuse than her stubbing her toe or something. An evil witch doesn't need much of an excuse to abuse magic after all. If she does this just because of sadism, why would she wait until she has the mortal's permission? That'll mean she has to wait longer to make one suffer, during which she won't see one suffering. Why would she offer him food, and actually give him delicious food, when that's giving a mortal a nice experience? It'd be more sadistic to not follow through on her promise, and you'd have to be almost as sadistic as possible to want to do what she does. I assume she spies on the mortals that she cursed, or else she wouldn't get to enjoy their suffering anyways. Another reason she wouldn't do this, when simply torturing with magic would give her far more time in a day to be sadistic. Also, she must be doing this out of racism against mortals, because she could conjure up a living being to curse instead of bothering them. And you'd think witches would encourage their kind to do that instead if they want to abuse magic on someone, to hide magic better. But she could be rebellious. And there's no way there's any witches spying on her that disapprove of her magic abuse, because if any saw this, they'd undo her curse instantly, avoiding the whole plot. And instead this has to operate on 70s logic, where the witches don't care about mortals and know they don't have to try hard to hide magic. In which case, there wouldn't be any punishing of witches when it comes to how they treat mortals. Jughead goes to Pop-Tate, but it's just to hang out with his friends because he's not hungry. He explains himself to them as Pop-Tate somehow jumps to the conclusion that he'll always be like this, and Veronica once again expresses hatred of him. I feel like the story is exaggerating her distaste for him, because it's happening more than I expect with no provoking. It's not like he's picking out at her house or a party, or insulting her or women, which is usually why she talks like this about him. A text box says the next month, and it shows him trying to eat a lot as if nothing changed. If he's just doing the same things he always does, we didn't need this page. All we really needed was one panel. Betty and Veronica try to convince Archie to be honest with Jughead about something that you'd think other people would have mentioned to him first, long ago. Veronica somehow thinks a ponytail is a little kid-style haircut, and it's satisfying that Betty one-ups her by saying she got to kiss Archie. Reggie wants to break it to him instead, and Archie is protective of Jughead by insisting that he should do it. And we get the ridiculous sight of Jughead's head somehow being the same size, while the rest of his body got bigger. Jughead would know he gained weight from the mirror, and you'd think someone would have made fun of him for this a while ago, so they can't be trying to break it to him that he's gaining weight. And instead they want to warn him to not eat so much, just out of compassion, to the point where they want to try even though it's obvious he wouldn't change his ways. As if there weren't enough out-of-character moments, Reggie can't bring himself to tell Jughead the truth. He says there's so many beautiful insults but they won't come out. Then it's even less believable. This never stopped him before. I know he's his friend, but nothing's ever stopped him from mistreating him in general. So Archie has the time to whisk Jughead away from him and show him a mirror. He obviously would have seen himself in a mirror long before this. What kind of house has no mirrors? And his dialogue when he sees the mirror is nonsensical. What bear? He somehow says he thought his mom shrank his clothes in the wash. Why is he playing dumb? It'd make no sense that he would have been kept oblivious to the fact that he was getting larger for this long. He tells Archie what he did. It was actually amusing that Archie said, "Alakazam! Eat a salad!" Archie decides to go to the diner, probably just joking around when he acts as if he believes Jughead right now. After all, if he did believe him, he'd know it's pointless and dangerous to go up against a witch. But since he didn't know better and wanted to humor his friend, it's at least believable that he came here. I'm impressed by the witch's intelligence because it looks like she thought to shapeshift to look more attractive. Actually, I'm supposed to believe that Jughead's metabolism made her look this way, when it's instantly obvious to everybody that magic could make her look this way. So she wouldn't have needed to get his metabolism that way to look like that. So if she always wanted to look like that, what took her so long? It's ridiculous. Thankfully, Archie goes from saying that no is cool with him to begging her to undo her spell. It's pointless to try, but at least he proved he cares after all. She says she'll undo the spell for Archie's most prized possession. His pure heart. What idiot would think Archie has a pure heart? He's portrayed as good but selfish, flawed. And that's why he even bothers dating Veronica when he should just date Betty, not hurt her feelings by dating Veronica. Because she assumed a better looking form, the story was leading up to her using that to her advantage. So I assumed that he was going to be expected to give up dating Betty and Veronica. If the comic's already going with the lenient idea of most prized possession by having a metabolism count, when it's not an object anyways. The point is, why does she think that Archie would think this was a huge sacrifice on the same level as before if she was able to get to know Jughead so well before meeting him? Why does she think that he would consider losing his pure heart to be a big inconvenience that would ruin his life instead of something that would free him up to do whatever he feels like? I mean, it would cause him to get more detentions and annoy women. You'd think she would just cut to the chase. It makes me wonder if the writer is even familiar with Archie, when anyone would think she'd get him to give up dating instead. Because the logic is she's getting people to sacrifice something that makes their life better. Occasionally he's as bad as Reggie and gets in on his misbehavior, so he's not morally perfect as it is. Betty consoles Jughead by saying metabolism isn't a thing, just to turn around and contradict herself, saying that's how fast your body burns calories. So it is a thing. I don't know why she'd say this. It's obvious that some people have better metabolisms than others, and so it does exist. Surprisingly, Jughead does try to have a burger without the burger and bun, when I'd expect him to want to keep eating like he does regardless, because he's never cared too much about his looks anyways, and is already used to being bad looking. Despite losing his pure heart, somehow Archie still reassures him and calls him buddy. He says he's got no more pure thoughts, and he tries to kiss Betty, but Veronica hits him, demonstrating why he wouldn't have tried to do this regardless. As pure heart and intelligence are not the same thing. There must have been a more believable way to show him without a heart. Like hitting Reggie, so this had better not be the end of it. Veronica desperately assumes Archie's heart is available for purchase when clearly purchasing it would just get him back to normal at best, and not make him always belong to the one who purchased it. Even if it did, that'd only be accomplished by brainwashing him into only dating one of them. Wouldn't that be creepy? So the girls confront the witch too, and her asking what is it with them and souls only draws attention to the fact that there's no reason Archie, Betty, and Veronica would have accused her of wanting their souls if she asked Jughead for his most prized possession. And these two have even less of an excuse because she already established a pattern. And while I get that Archie assumed this from being wrong genre savvy, there's no logical way she'd want a soul anyways. She wants to make them suffer from the consequences of giving up their compassion and status. Although she doesn't phrase it like suffer from the consequences of. Betty wonders how she'd be herself, but then becomes a parody of herself by saying this could be her one chance before agreeing. As if she'd only be doing this to get Archie to herself. If you want to make Betty have a big sacrifice, you'd think her big sacrifice would be giving up on Archie. That's what everyone would assume would be her equivalent of Jughead giving up his metabolism and being expected to not eat burgers anymore. They walk out of the diner laughing like evil idiots, and it somehow takes until now for them to realize that they don't know which one of them gets to keep Archie's heart. And why would they think keeping it would do anything other than keep him evil? Veronica takes the risk of trying to provoke the witch, but luckily someone as sadistic as her didn't lash out at her for it. Veronica trips, and Betty laughs at her, and after she expects her father to fix things from force of habit, of course she's told that she's poor now, although only suspicion-causing obvious magic would have replaced her big mansion with a little grey house with a sign for the lodges on it. You'd think her father would be very confused and wonder how it happened. It's not just Jughead and his friends, he's been exposed to witchcraft with undeniable evidence too. And I bet this is going to be completely forgotten about. Based on Mr. Lodge's reaction, while it's already obvious that Betty's lack of compassion will ruin her reputation, and of course she'll get detentions a lot, other than that, this is the only way we've seen her lack of compassion really backfiring on her. And it's not like Veronica actually punishes her for it. The girls go back to Pop-Tate's and find out that the witch didn't even give them back what she says she would, naturally. And instead gave them useless things. At least she had the common sense to think to do that. Veronica yells at Jughead to go fix things. I get why, because she's stressed out, so it makes sense. Even though realistically he wouldn't be able to fix things on his own if they couldn't. He feels bad and sees the farmer's market, goes inside, and somehow when he sees a blonde lady from the back, he thinks that looks like Sabrina, when really he'd think it just looks like any old blonde girl because of her very generic hairstyle, and only find her familiar from seeing her face. This would have been justified if the artist had the sense to give her back her iconic bob haircut. She screams because of how he looks now, and somehow he sees witch food at a mortal farmer's market. I thought witches bought the stuff at witch marts, out of the way of mortals. Not to mention she could have just zapped it up, unless it has magic in it and so she can't. Whatever, she could have easily been here for a mortal reason instead, because this wouldn't be the only time it was referenced that members of her family went shopping when they don't have to. It's more implausible that Jughead went to a farmer's market to get healthy food in the first place. Sabrina's already heard of Darlene. She says that it sounds like Darlene's favorite scam. She must be either the only witch who does this, or one of the only witches on Earth who does this if she's famous for it in particular, to the point where Sabrina already knew about her without being related to her, when she just showed up in Riverdale. Hey, what caused her to move to new locations anyways? She's omnipotent, so she couldn't get scared away from a place. What made her move to Riverdale in particular? It makes perfect sense that she tells him she's a witch, since Jughead tells her about a witch problem that only she could help with. And it'd be cruel to pretend not to believe him, combined with the fact that she must have wanted an excuse to be honest with her friend about it for years. That has to be why she told him, because she could have feigned disbelief and then used magic to solve the problem in secret, and no one would figure out it was her. And I don't know why her secret wasn't outright written down in text when she said it. For the epic issue where she finally tells him she's a witch, this isn't how anyone would imagine this to happen. It's a believable excuse for him to find out. There's plenty of evil witches, and if you already grew up with Sabrina, at that point it was believable that he'd meet an evil one too. And while she could have easily not moved to Riverdale in particular and done this, it'd be even more confusing if she was here all along, because I'd wonder what took her so long for her to start to do this. We see Darlene talk to herself for some reason, saying that she can sell the things she got on a witch's black market. But if witches can summon anything, wouldn't they have no need for buying these things? They could just point and imagine and alter themselves to have Jughead's metabolism or something for free. And even if they couldn't, there'd be potions for that stuff. So this is a pathetic excuse for the story to happen. But I can forgive it because it was always obvious that she's sadistic. So this doesn't prove that sadism was not one of the reasons she was doing this. She expects me to believe that the power of a pure heart can power 1,000 love spells. A witch would only need something to power a love spell if she wasted all her magic beforehand and became stuck without it for weeks. They never had trouble casting them before, but it's believable that someone would want to save magic by using a magical artifact, or that someone with money to spare would be impatient enough to buy this while waiting to get her magic back. The only reason she has these things is because she used magic to make them into objects with energy in them, so they have a fraction of her own magic in them. And a thing being able to power any spell would be because it has magic to lend to it, or it's a potion ingredient. It's a bit confusing that one of these things could power 1,000 love spells, as if it has more magic in it than her. Usually whenever we see a love spell, it's just about uncontrollable lust, so pure heart would have nothing to do with it. Usually the victim just wants to kiss the person. So this must be for powering a love spell that doesn't make the person too affectionate and annoying. She wants to keep the metabolism for herself, even though she could point and change her metabolism to be like this with her magic permanently without keeping this. Not to mention, even if she couldn't do that, she could zap away her weight whenever she wants, like Hilda showed she could do in the 90s comic. So all she had to do is stupidly deprive herself of the money she'd make from selling this. She sees Jughead in the mirror and gets told that she owes him the recipe for the amazing cheeseburger. She says that he deserves to have it because she loves his metabolism. Somehow, she actually tries to do something nice for him here, despite the fact that she'd only do this whole plan if she's insanely sadistic. Then she somehow figures out that this is a diversion with no reason to find him suspicious. No reason to suspect that a mortal would take the risk of trying to do something a witch wouldn't approve of. And looks behind her and sees that Sabrina's flying broom has picked up the magical orbs. I have to assume the orbs can't be warped away or shapeshifted. And she wanted to be subtle and quiet about getting them back, so she couldn't just blow them away with a massive wind. But wait a minute, she wouldn't have to be careful about what spell to use to retrieve them if she cast a spell on her when she didn't expect it. So there's no excuse for Sabrina not doing that to make this easier. She could have frozen her in time, for just one example. It's not like her plan was supposed to account for it being seen, and so Jughead was meant to put the orbs on her all along. Jughead cleverly makes her wear stuff that'll give her enough compassion to agree to give the orbs back. But that would only last for a few seconds before she takes them off. The story risks being cheesy when Jughead says about compassion that there are even better qualities to have in your friends. Sadly, the story cuts ahead to Veronica outside celebrating that her mansion's back. I wanted to see how Sabrina handled Darlene after she'd inevitably go evil again in seconds. At least this way, I'm allowed to assume she simply turned her into a frog, instead of a ridiculously dragged out fight where they throw light at each other. So Betty and Veronica hug, and Betty says she's happy for her. And just after she shows compassion, somehow Betty tells Archie she's still mad at him, when they know his behavior earlier wasn't his fault. Betty and Veronica aren't supposed to be so similar that they'd miraculously say the same unlikely sentence simultaneously. They must have rehearsed this. Times like this always make me think, what's the point of Betty if she's not completely loyal to him? She never was, but he could get a more loyal girl than both of them eventually. And then Betty would have no appeal if she had Betty's good qualities too. When the Archie comics first started, Betty and Veronica were pretty similar to each other in personality. Betty was basically just as likely to be mean to him and even physically hurt him. Then eventually Betty was changed so that she would be nicer and Veronica would be more exaggeratedly mean. So it was too frustratingly obvious that Betty was the better choice, so it was actually less frustrating when both of them were bad choices. Jughead says he couldn't have done it without an old friend, and Veronica somehow responds by thinking that her status helped get things back to normal. Sabrina could easily erase their memories of what Darlene did. I guess she always wanted an excuse to see what it would be like if all of them knew about witchcraft. But we shouldn't have to just assume that's why she didn't do that, when it would normally be out of character for her to not do that. Betty looks stupid by asking if Jughead got his metabolism back, when of course he did. He says he still needs to eat a balanced diet. And we see that the coach started getting him to do some running. What made him assume that it was the burger he ate from her that cursed him? I thought she pointed at him while he was distracted eating, but this way is faster for her. The story ends with the coach assuming that he hallucinated. This contrived story by Tom Root, where Sabrina tells Jughead her secret, was a huge disappointment in how forced its writing was. Which wasn't a guarantee when the idea of an evil witch cursing Jughead isn't by itself contrived as an excuse for him finding out she's a witch when he grew up with Sabrina. Sure, the witch moving to Riverdale in particular could have easily not happened. So I'm disappointed that we never learn why she chose Riverdale. In fact, maybe it should have been Della or Enchantra who cursed him. Because they're previously established characters who were already established to be okay with doing bad things just for fun. But that's the least of the story's problems. Maybe she chose Riverdale because she's related to someone who lives there. Still, Jughead even discovering the diner was forced and out was written. He only discovered it because after Veronica assumes for no reason that Archie's idea is to go to Pop Tate's again, Jughead decided to take the long way home, even though he's supposed to be lazy, because he suddenly cares enough to prove that he isn't too predictable to someone he doesn't care about the opinion of. When being predictable is something he's proud of, because it takes pride in who he is. Since when would Veronica be tired of the chocolate shop? He could have easily discovered the diner because a road was under construction instead. Or at least he could have been told about the diner by Archie because of word of mouth. So there's really a different reason the whole plot shouldn't have happened. It's because another reason he's out of character is that he assumes Darlene's gonna steal his soul, when if he was the type to jump to believing in supernatural people, he'd already know Sabrina's a witch. So he definitely has no excuse for agreeing to give up his metabolism if he knows Darlene could steal his soul. Somehow that was the conclusion he came to. So since he is capable of resisting food, and could have gone somewhere else for the same type of food, where there wasn't a risk of losing something so important, it's just barely believable that he gets himself cursed this way, when he knows she's magical. It's an idiot plot when it could have easily happened because she stubbed her toe and cursed him out of stress without him doing anything dumb, when she was already jealous of his metabolism. At least it was noble of his friends to make sacrifices to try to save him, even if Veronica and Betty were being uncharacteristically stupid. Well, I left the part where Sabrina and Jughead worked together to save the day. Sabrina didn't have to be subtle with her magic when she could have just frozen Darlene in time. But then we wouldn't have gotten to see what Jughead did. Him turning the witch good with the orbs was brilliant. But it's obvious that she would have gone evil the second they'd be taken off her. So it was lame that we didn't get to see how Sabrina dealt with her after that. It's like we missed how a climactic fight was ended. Why wasn't Sabrina shown pointing to tie her up? It's sad to say that you're better off skipping to the part with Sabrina in it, because everything before that was poorly written from unusually bad characterization.